You're doing one of the most extreme things you can do on this earth. You're hunting down other human beings and trying to kill them, and they're trying to kill you. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we had so many weird things happening in Vietnam, truly miracles that it takes you years to assimilate.
A soldier looks back on his 3 perilous tours in Vietnam with the belief that a hidden world beyond the known revealed itself to him in warfare.
We knew we were in the Marine Corps together, so he would give me the old Semper Fi and how you doing. But I think we really latched on when he found out I was becoming a pastor. He just thought that was great.
Another warrior, now passed away, is recalled by comrades for his strength, his love of the Marine Corps, and how his own faith was kindled in Vietnam by a grievous wound and a miraculous rescue. Hello, and welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. In this episode, we'll hear how 2 warriors emerged from the Vietnam War with a powerful faith, first revealed in combat, then tested in blood. David Aldridge is the author of our first story, Gait of Power, a supernatural tale that manifested in the jungles of Vietnam. Following my interview with David, we'll hear Robert Waldruff's tale of his phenomenal rescue from bleeding out on a Vietnamese battlefield, an event which began Robert's lifelong, abiding faith in God. Robert has passed away, so I'll talk with fellow Mighty Pen writers David Aldridge and Joe Maslanka about the tough, loving friend, Marine, and writer we all knew, Robert Waldruff. First, let's listen to David Aldridge's Gait of Power, read by Alan Sater.
There was a flurry of activity in the Bravo Company area at LZ X-Ray as Sergeant Colombo gathered up his stray members of the ambush squad. There were 12 of us. Sergeant Colombo called it a Squad Plus ambush, meaning we had a squad of 9 men plus extra members. The extra 3 guys carried a second machine gun and extra ammo for it. Everyone was required to carry machine gun ammunition. I had 200 M60 rounds on top of my normal weapon load. Having given up my malfunctioning M16 rifle, I carried an M79 grenade launcher that fired 40-millimeter rounds. Some call the weapon a blooper or a thumper because of the noise it made when a round was fired from it. I had 50 high-explosive 40-millimeter rounds in a large canvas bag with a strap that cut into my shoulders. Additionally, I carried 10 canister rounds for the M79 in a large bag that was strapped diagonally across my chest. 8 hand grenades were in the side pockets of my jungle fatigue pants. On my Army-issued rucksack were 3 smoke grenades, 4 canteens of water, and a poncho liner with assorted sea rations. There was no way to get comfortable carrying all that equipment. I could only pray we weren't going too far for the ambush. The extra ammo for the machine gun was inside my rucksack. I was on the verge of praying for a firefight just so I could get rid of the extra ammo. The M79 was an unusual weapon. It's 3 feet long, a break-action gun that broke open like an old shotgun. The HE rounds it fired were accurate up to 400 meters. Where it exploded, the killing radius was 5 meters. It could be fired straight up, like a mortar round. If you practiced, you could put out 6 or 7 rounds before the first round landed. I liked it because it was never known to misfire like the M16 did. If I was going to die, it was going to cost the enemy dearly. The only problem with the 40-millimeter HE rounds was that they would not arm themselves until they had traveled at least 30 meters. It was probably a good thing that the rounds had to complete so many revolutions before they could explode. In the jungle, you rarely got a clear shot with the M79. There were always trees and vines in the way, and trying to fire HE rounds through them could prove hazardous to your health. You had to make sure that you had a hole in the jungle ceiling you could shoot them through. Not so with the canister rounds, which were like large shotgun shells. They were deadly from 0 out to 25 meters, each one packed between 20 and 27 steel balls in the shell, depending on who the manufacturer was, wielding a breech-loaded weapon, and you had to crack it open, put the round in the chamber from the rear. When it was closed with a round inside, the safety was automatically engaged. With a slight push forward on the safety, you could pull the trigger and it would fire. If you had a round in the chamber and the gun was closed, it didn't take much to accidentally fire the weapon. If you were carrying the M79 and you tripped on a vine in the jungle floor, you could fire it straight into the ground or into the back of the guy in front of you. It was guaranteed he would not be happy about receiving an HE round in the back. The golden rule was, as they taught us in the combat indoctrination course, never walk with a round in the chamber in the closed position. Always walk with the M79 either completely empty or cocked open to guard against accidental firings. Your comrades would always thank you for this. Sergeant Colombo checked each of us out personally, pulling on our web gear and equipment straps. It was absolutely forbidden in our battalion to carry hand grenades the John Wayne style hanging off our web gear. Vines would catch the ring on the safety pins and pull them out as you maneuvered through the thick jungle. The resulting explosion would kill the soldier and perhaps one or two of his buddies near him. I showed Sergeant Colombo my empty M79 and my empty web gear with no dangling hand grenades. He made one soldier put his shiny aluminum canteen in the side pocket of his jungle fatigue pants. A guy from another platoon started out walking point into the jungle next to my bunker on the perimeter. I noticed that he checked his compass first. Sergeant Colombo told us we were going in single file and to always keep 5 meters between us and the guy in front of us. He said we were supposed to go out 1,000 meters on this ambush. 1,000 meters in triple canopy jungle is a long way because sometimes it's so thick you have to cut your way through the jungle. I carried a machete that was razor sharp in a sheath on my web belt. It was my last resort if, God forbid, I ever had to engage in hand-to-hand combat. When you first look at triple canopy jungle, it looks impenetrable. You can't figure out which way to go because it looks just like a solid wall of green vegetation. As you begin to walk in it, you start to see where animals, or perhaps humans, have made a trail already. I'd already learned to stay off the trails during my first firefight that day. I never had to learn that lesson again. It looked like the point man was making his own trail through the jungle, and I felt relieved. Periodically, I heard him cut at bushes or vines with his machete. The name, Triple Canopy Jungle, itself sounded awesome. It also means it was as thick as any jungle anywhere on Earth, just about impenetrable. There was a growth of vines and small bushes up to approximately waist level, then another growth of plants and foliage up to 15, 20 feet off the ground. On top of all that was a growth of various small, medium, and large trees up to 50 feet high or higher. Once in a while, when walking in the jungle, we would encounter trees that were much larger than those, and I soon learned that they were mahogany or teakwood trees, hardest wood in the world. You could survive an atomic bomb hiding behind one of those trees. It was slow going, as the point man was extra cautious and would pause frequently to just sit and listen to the jungle. The sun was not completely down yet, so we still had plenty of light. The weight of the ammo I carried cut into my shoulders. After a couple 100 meters, I wanted nothing more than to stop and take everything off. On we trudged. Once, Sergeant Colombo came back to ask me if I was okay, and I told him, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm going to need a new pair of shoulders when we get back to Lai K." He laughed and said, "It's not too far now." Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, we halted, and the guy in front of me said, "Get down, we're there already." It was still twilight. One by one, Sergeant Colombo put each of us in place where he wanted us. I was the last one. He put me on the far right flank of the ambush. I was 3 feet from the next guy. Sergeant Colombo said that there was an old trail out in front of us and to put our claymore mines out 10 meters in front of us. I dropped all my gear, spread my poncho liner on the jungle floor. I made sure to get rid of as much of the twigs and leaves from around my area as possible so I wouldn't make noise during the night. Felt good to have circulation back in my shoulders. I took out my M18A1 Claymore mine and unwound all the electrical cord. I walked out to the trail and emplaced my Claymore, making sure to aim it properly, that is, away from me. For soldiers who were a little slow and couldn't remember which way to point the claymore, it had printed and embossed on one side, front, toward enemy. I put the electric blasting cap from the M4 blasting cap assembly in the mine, walked back to my place on the ground. I then plugged my cord into my M57 firing device clacker, which was a small hand generator that was used to detonate the mine. One squeeze on the clacker would set off a huge explosion. There was no need to test fire it to see if it worked. I already knew that my comrades wouldn't appreciate that at all. I made sure the safety was on and began laying out hand grenades right in front of where I would rest my head. Everything was ready. I slowly opened some C rations, cheese and crackers. I felt relatively secure sitting there. The claymore was the reason why. The M18A1 Claymore was a vicious anti-personnel weapon named by its inventor, Norman MacLeod, after a large Scottish medieval sword. Like the sword, the mine could easily cut men in half. It was effective out to 55 meters and could be deadly out to 100 meters. If aimed correctly, one mine could take out an entire squad of the enemy in one fell swoop. It had over 700 little steel balls embedded in a sheet of epoxy resin plastic, and behind all that was 1.5 pounds of C4 explosive. The steel balls came out at a speed of almost 4,000 feet per second and very cruelly shredded whatever was in front of it. After eating my crackers, I sipped on some of my water. It was almost dark. PFC Klinger had showed me how to light a cigarette the night before so that no one could see it. I got under my poncho liner, fired up a cigarette with my Zippo lighter, carefully cupping it with both hands like he'd shown me. There was no wind in the jungle, so I blew the smoke straight up. It seemed like ages since Klinger had been killed. Earlier that day. Time was not what it once was. It seemed more ephemeral now. Was it really only 8 hours since the firefight? I couldn't allow myself to think about what had happened earlier that day. I forced my attention out into the dark jungle and listened closely. I listened for anything that sounded like people walking or talking or stumbling around. I also listened for any metal-on-metal sounds. After an hour, Sergeant Colombo crawled over to me to see how I was doing. He said, "Hopefully nothing will happen tonight. Maybe the VC have departed the area already." I said simply, "I hope so." As he was kneeling by me, a noise began to rise out of the jungle, a couple of 100 meters away. The noise gained in volume. Sounded like it was coming our way. It sounded like a huge beast was shaking the trees and jungle foliage with a huge, sweeping motion. I prayed for whatever it was to go in a different direction. I dreaded what would happen if it came to us. The noise got louder. Sergeant Colombo bit down and whispered to the guy lying next to me, "Do not fire your weapons until you hear me fire mine. Pass the word to the next guy." The noise continued to rise as it approached our ambush site. My bowels jerked around in my gut involuntarily. I lay as low as I could to the ground. The noise rose to a cacophony of 100 trees shaking and the rustling of 1,000,000 leaves at once. I felt the beginning of the paralyzing fear I had endured earlier that day in the firefight. My heart raced. I got my clacker ready to blow someone into the next world. The noise was 50 meters from us now and coming fast. We could hear loud grunting of some kind, along with the leaves shaking. Sergeant Colombo got on the ground with me, took up one of my hand grenades. "Hold your fire. Pass the word." The guy next to me passed the word down the line. The noise of the rustling leaves and shaking trees got louder as it came right up to our ambush, and then veered to our right flank. Sergeant Colombo said loud enough for the next guy to hear, "Fucking monkeys! Fucking monkeys!" There were thousands of monkeys who shrieked and bellowed at us. Apparently they could see us, smell us. We couldn't see them. What did we do if they attacked? Did they have rabies? They seemed to object mightily to our presence. I never took my hands off the clacker, and this continued for 5 minutes. Slowly, they continued their nocturnal journey through the jungle. I put the clacker down so I wouldn't accidentally fire it. My heart was still racing when Sergeant Colombo returned to his place in the middle of the ambush. Holy shit! After my heart rate settled down, I pulled my poncho liner over my head and fired up another cigarette. At that point, I really didn't care if the enemy could smell the burning tobacco or not. My muscles were fatigued from all the adrenaline I experienced that day. I enjoyed my cigarette immensely as I listened for human beings and sipped on some water periodically. 2 hours later, I heard rustling in the leaves in front of me again. I presumed everyone else heard it too because Sergeant Colombo passed word down to me to be ready. A few minutes later, he'd showed up at my side, said he was going out to check the claymores, to not hit the clacker or shoot him. A few minutes later, he was back and said, someone turned the claymores around backwards. My heart began to gallop in my chest. Sergeant Colombo moved down the line of the ambush to notify everyone. There was more rustling in the bushes and to our right flank. Sergeant Colombo came back again and said, we're going to blow the ambush. When you hear my claymore go off, then blow yours. Then we all throw a hand grenade and run back and you cover us. After we run back, I want you to get up and fire a canister round and throw a hand grenade out in front of you. Then you can follow the rest of us. The "you cover us" part bothered me quite a bit. I wanted to argue that I shouldn't be the last one to leave the ambush site, but I just said, okay, Sarge. I swallowed the acidic bile in my mouth and felt in front for my clacker and a hand grenade. I made sure I had a canister round in my M79 and waited. Boom, 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 in rapid succession. Everyone's claymores went off, and then their hand grenades exploded. They each fired a magazine from their rifles out into the ambush kill zone, then jumped and ran back. I fired my claymore shortly afterwards using my clacker. As soon as my claymore exploded, I threw a hand grenade into the air so it would land 25 meters straight out from me and got up on one knee to fire my canister round. I shouldered the M79 and fired. In the explosion of the canister round, a North Vietnamese soldier's face was illuminated 3 feet from the end of the barrel. Fear seized me again. I jumped up and grabbed my large bag of 40-millimeter rounds with my left hand. In my right hand, I still held my M79. I abandoned all my water, rucksack, hand grenades, and poncho liner to the enemy and ran away from the ambush site. As I ran, I heard the pop, 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 pop of numerous AK-47s. I didn't want to get shot in the back, so I bent over at the waist and crouched low. I held a bag of HE rounds close to my body. My right hand held my M79. Immediately, in a shocking revelation, I could see the jungle out in front of me. It was like looking through a light green mist as I ran. Everything was visible. The whole jungle, which had been pitch black before, was illuminated by a diffused light green opalescence. I could see every tree and vine. I was stunned. I thought I'd entered a separate reality, not of this world. I had never run all bent over like that before in my entire life. It was uncomfortable at first, but within 10 paces, I couldn't stop myself. I ran at full speed, stayed low to the ground with my back straight as I pumped my knees almost to my chest, and did my best to avoid each and every tree, branch, and vine. The logical part of my brain was not engaged as the jungle to both sides of me became a blur. Everything in front of me was still crystal clear and distinct. I had no difficulty breathing. I had no time to ponder what was going on. The jungle I ran through commanded my attention. I knew somehow that I had to keep focused to the front. My breathing took on a regular rhythm of its own, and it wasn't labored or spasmodic as before. My arms weren't tired as they should have been from carrying the heavy M79 rounds. Power surged through me as I ran. I could see every tree, every branch, every bush and fallen tree or vine. I easily jumped the fallen limbs, which I had to, or dodged left or right as needed. I had a general direction I wanted to go and never really thought about it. I just ran, juking left or right, ducking, hurdling, or sidestepping when necessary. Within 10 minutes, I could see our night defense position at landing zone X-ray up ahead of me, and I hollered out, "Friendlies, coming in, hold your fire, don't shoot." I slowed down as I neared the bunker line, finally stood more erect. The light green mist I had run through that made the world visible at night slowly dissipated. It became pitch black again. Suddenly, Staff Sergeant Jimenez was in front of me, asking me where everyone else from the ambush was. I told him, "I don't know." I was the last one to leave after we blew the ambush. He called me a liar. He said I panicked and ran away and left everyone. He was screaming at me that I was a fucking cowardly twink. I'd had enough of him and his verbal abuse. I cut him off and said, "Listen to me, I'm not a twink, God damn it, so stop calling me that. I did exactly what Sergeant Colombo told me to do. Ask him yourself when he shows up." He didn't say another word. Captain Turner walked up to ask me what happened. I told him everything. I included the fact that an NVA soldier was right in front of me when I fired my canister round. It took Sergeant Colombo and the rest of the ambush personnel over an hour to get back to the NDP. I had no explanation whatsoever as to what had happened to me. It seemed supernatural to me, and I knew I would not be believed, so I just shut up. I never felt any compulsion to tell anyone about being able to see at night in the jungle. My whole company already thought I was weird for volunteering to come to the bush from my cushy job in Saigon. I didn't need any extra shit from them. I walked over to Sergeant Colombo and reported what happened when he blew the ambush. Captain Turner, who had been listening, said he would request a tracker canine team at first light and for everyone to get some sleep. He ordered 50% watch for that night. That meant I would get at least some sleep while someone else was on guard duty. I managed to get 3 hours sleep before someone shook me and told me to get saddled up, go back to the ambush site. The tracker dog was a very big German shepherd. His handler said to let him know when we got close to the ambush site. After an hour and a half, Sergeant Colombo told everyone that we were about 100 meters from the site. The handler brought his dog up to the point. It started walking briskly along our man-made trail from the day before. 25 meters from the site, the dog alerted. The handler said, "This is where we stop." My dog alerted. "There's a dead body up there somewhere." The guy seemed scared to me. How did I know? I was now an expert on fear. Sergeant Colombo took over walking point, and we were soon at the site. The smell of death and cordite hovered in the air. Over in front of where I had lain, there was hair, blood, brain matter on all the bushes, on the bark of the trees. Sergeant Colombo came over and said loud enough for Staff Sergeant Jimenez to hear, "Good job, Aldridge. There are lots of blood trails. They lead away down the trail to the left, also to the right. Looks like you got another one with your claymore." Jimenez never apologized. I gathered up my gear from the ground. We headed back for the NDP. I never really had time to ponder what had happened that night on ambush when I ran through the jungle. The rest of my tour in Vietnam came at me 1,000 miles a minute up until the day I left for the States. I had filed my experience away under the title of Strange and Unbelievable Things That Happen in Combat, and never really knew what to think of it. Many years later, I was reading one of Carlos Castaneda's books about his adventures with Don Juan Matus, a Yaqui Indian sorcerer from the Sonoran Desert of northern Mexico. The book was titled Journey to Ixtlan. Don Juan had explained that he wanted Carlos to utilize one of the ancient sorcerer's techniques and urged him day and night to try it. Carlos explained that he just wasn't made for the life of a sorcerer. It was useless information for him. Don Juan prodded him to try it. Don Juan showed Carlos time and again how to do it by sprinting off into the desert night. After practicing unsuccessfully for a long time and crashing into bushes numerous times, Carlos was finally able to do it. He ran at full speed, all bent over at the waist, his knees pumping up and down almost to his chest. Carlos could see out into the Sonoran Desert where it had been pitch black before. Everything was crystal clear for him. He was able to avoid the crevices and cracks in the desert floor. While doing the Gait of Power, Carlos encountered different entities that frightened him witless and spurred him on. Carlos asked about them as the sun came up. Don Juan said that those entities almost killed Carlos. Don Juan added that Carlos had only been spared because he had followed Don Juan's instructions correctly in doing the Gait of Power. I knew at that moment that Carlos Castaneda and Don Juan were not imaginary characters in a book, but very real people, and that Carlos's books had the ring of truth in them. I thought, so that's what it's called. Afterwards, I would pay closer attention to all of Castaneda's books. There was much to be learned.
I'm joined by David Aldridge, author of Gait of Power. David, I know you have written a lot of stories about what you call the supernatural, but it seems as if a common thread in your work, and certainly in this story, is that combat seems to be some sort of portal into a world beyond what we can see. But the Gate of Power, this story, was your introduction to the supernatural qualities that revealed themselves to you in combat, yeah?
Yes, it was.
Take us back to what it felt like to realize that there was more than what you could see and hear, and it was making itself manifest to you.
I was astounded, actually, when I started running away from the ambush. It's almost like once I bent over from fear of being shot in the back, once I bent over and started running, it's like I engaged another possibility for human beings, and everything out in front of me just became perfectly clear with this mint green colored reality that I ran through.
I've worn night vision goggles, the old ones, right? And it's exactly like that. It's a lime kind of minty green. Did it look like that?
It sure did. It was very similar to that, and it was frightening because I'd never seen that before. I expected nothing but pitch black darkness, and when I could see out in front of me, I just went with it. I never changed my posture. I kept running bent over as fast as I could, and it seemed to be a natural occurrence.
You got back an hour before the rest of your unit, so much so that your CO accused you of being a coward, accused you of leaving early.
Well, it wasn't my CO, it was my platoon sergeant, Jimenez. He was always on me. He was always on my back.
Well, he called you a twink.
He
And you
did.
stood up for yourself.
That was his favorite term.
But you wouldn't take it. You stood up for
No,
yourself.
I had already been through one firefight that day and killed a few North Vietnamese, and I just wasn't going to take it anymore. So I resisted his little nickname for me.
What do you think is out there that you've had your first exposure to in combat? It must be a little frightening to consider that our reality is not our lone reality.
First of all, I think the extremes of fear and the extremes of the emotions you experience in a firefight is what leads to this supernatural possibility. You're doing one of the most extreme things you can do on this earth. You're hunting down other human beings and trying to kill them, and they're trying to kill you. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we had so many weird things happening in Vietnam, truly miracles that it takes you years to assimilate. I had a hand grenade go off next to me and I wasn't even touched. What is the deal here, you know? And of course, many supernatural experiences were to follow, but that was one of the first. That was one of the first.
The question asks itself, Dave, why you?
I had been raised in a particular way. I had been what you might call a street fighter when I was younger. Living in the projects, you have to learn to fight or get your ass stomped every day. And I think because of the experiences I had had growing up, that left me open to other experiences that I had in Vietnam. And I didn't have a closed mind. I was very open-minded about everything, including the existence of God. And so I considered myself not really an atheist, but borderline atheist when I was in Vietnam. And yet I heard a voice all the time that seemed to be a natural part of the experience in combat, telling me when to stop and where to look and what to do. And so I was always grateful. I was always grateful for the experiences I had.
But you didn't confide this to your fellow soldiers.
No, they already thought I was weird enough because I had left Saigon, where I was a security guard, and volunteered to go to the Big Red One. I mean, who does that, you know? So they were suspicious of me right away. They thought maybe I was coming in to try to be a hero and, get everybody else killed.
Not the best reputation.
No,
So
no.
give me a quick list. So there was the Gait of Power, there was the voice. But run me through, if you can, a quick memory checklist of the supernatural things you saw in combat.
Ah, geez.
I know there was a UFO.
Well, there's been lots of UFOs, but yeah,
The French fort.
yeah. We did an ambush one time, and there was a huge battle that broke out right in front of us, not 25 meters from us. We had no idea what was going on. It wasn't us that blew the ambush. And so I just told everybody, hold your fire, and this huge battle broke out in front of us, machine gun fire, people screaming. And then it slowly, after about 10 minutes, it just slowly drifted away. And after the sun came up, we went out to search the kill zone and discovered all kinds of old ammo from like World War II and bandages that fell apart in your hands. And so that was another supernatural experience. Scared the living hell out of every one of us. And I even keyed the mic so that everybody in the rear could hear the battle in front of us. So everybody heard it on the radio, and yet they were ghosts. They weren't there.
So Dave Aldridge, tell me what it all means.
I think it means you never truly understand just how much we are protected by unseen forces, the spirit world, if you want to call it that, what I call the unseen God, the Almighty God who rules this universe. I think that it all means that there's much more that we don't understand, but you'll never understand if you close your mind off to it. You have to remain open. Say, look, we had these experiences. What do they mean? What happened? What really happened? And it's only by searching like that.
Or by being scared shitless.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not leave that out.
And that too, the extremes of fear, almost to the point of heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn. And it goes along with the imperative, know thyself. I think that's what it means.
You're seeming to say there are boundaries to what we experience. And if you can approach that boundary through, let's say, extreme fear or meditation, some would say prayer, the boundaries of our world are not the end. They're just the boundaries of this world. And at those boundaries, you can stand at that precipice and see ghosts from another era fighting. You can see a pitch black jungle with a power that comes not from this world. You can hear a voice. Yeah. And all that opened up to you in combat.
Absolutely. Those boundaries disappear sometimes. I'm very grateful that I had those experiences, and I wanted to share that experience with the world because it was so extraordinary. I was always grateful, even when I didn't know what the name of it was. We like to put labels on things. Don Juan put a good label on it. Gait of Power, Gait. I think anybody can do that, but how many people will actually ever try it?
Last question. Have you had the courage to ask where this comes from?
I have many times in meditation, and the answer was always clear. It is all God, even the air we breathe.
I would say especially the air we
Yes,
breathe.
that's right.
I know that you believe everything happens for a reason. You're coming to the Mighty Pen Project and us meeting. To me, that was my lime green moment when I got to meet you. All right. Thank you, buddy.
God bless you, brother.
You too. Now, our second story, Guardian Angel, performed by Ken Moretti. Afterward, I'll speak with fellow Mighty Pen writers David Aldridge and Marine Joe Maslanka about author Robert Waldruff.
Tom loved being with the Marine grunts of India Company. He enjoyed their raw expressions of fatality, tough characters with big hearts. Word came for India to move to the bush on a company-sized operation. Destiny headed them to the Arizona Territory, a dangerous area of jungle, hedgerows, and endless small villages, always contested and full of bad guys. With no desire for medals and souvenirs, Tom knew all the fools were dead. This opportunity to get some war stories and talk shit in the officers' club with fraternity brothers was exhilarating, though. Initiation time. At 04:30 hours began the ritual of organizing stuff, filling canteens, checking ammo, and eating as much hot chow as possible with sea rats on the menu for the next several days. Grunts trudged to the pad, bitching about the dangerous and nasty Arizona, and why the fuck did India Company get this mission? Moaning and groaning was a Marine tradition. Birds landed to fill up with men and equipment. India Company headed out with more than 100 riflemen dressed in flak jackets and steel helmets, carrying all types of handheld weapons to inflict maximum death and destruction. With his .45 holstered and M16 in hand, Tom gritted his teeth and slowly nodded. Like a rock. Lock and load, let's get some. Tom boarded the third chopper with the company commander and his staff. Last night, the CO briefed officers and NCOs that the mission required providing security for peasants of Mihyep village as they harvested a huge and vital corn crop planted by VC and their NVA advisors to resupply rations stored in their mountain sanctuaries. Not sharing this bounty with the locals, made possible by Marine protectors, offered the potential of a tremendous psychological victory. The skipper cautioned of enemy resistance, but not to worry due to the presence of their awesome firepower. Afterwards, the CO grabbed Tom. I know you've only been in country 5 weeks and this mission will be OJT, but it's no sweat. We all start this way. Stay close, pay attention, and you'll be fine. Tom fluttered over the Vujia River, watching it meander and knife through thick canopy. Huge bomb craters scarred the earth, memories of recent battles. Tom stared at the endless vistas of beautiful, lush green, crisscrossed with open wounds of devastation. Fields filled with dead trees, covered in the thick powder of Agent Orange's malignant death. The juxtaposition of natural beauty and man's ugly destruction recalled Greek tragedy. Tom landed, checked radios, pulled out maps and compasses, and got oriented. Soon all the Marines disembarked, formed up, and the long green line slowly moved to Mihyep. Tom and India Company followed a winding narrow trail overrun with brush. Sniper holes from long ago ambushes punctured the trail, slowing the march. The company labored to its destination, walking through a furnace of July heat and humidity. Harassing sniper fire, concealed by endless hedgerows and thick canopy, tracked them. At Mihyep, straw huts circled the compound. A poor man's subdivision. Several large huts for social and political events stood in the center. Peppers and other vegetables, fermented fish, and rice dried on racks of twigs and bamboo. A single well supplied water. Small people shuffled around purposely, chattering softly. Things seemed calm and routine. Outside the village sprawled the cornfield bordered by large open spaces and long rows of 10 feet high hedgerows. The menacing jungle enclosed this checkerboard. The Onbang Mountain sanctuary to the VC and NVA rose in the distance. Resting from the long, sweaty hump, Tom's helmet and flak jacket fell off. Radios hissed and crackled as the captain positioned his platoons to form a 360 perimeter. All eyes followed the FNG, trying to act like assault. Tom faked boredom, giving the grunts a grin. He noticed every Marine dug a fighting hole, so he sheepishly unstrapped his E-tool and began digging a deep hole. Dusk crept in, and the LPs were set. Darkness fenced them in. Next day, the villagers fanned out into the cornfield to harvest bushel after bushel of the corn. Tom plotted the map, identifying locations of possible enemy filtration, and locked in coordinates. He talked of home and families with the CO, ate sea rats, fought the Malays, and tried to stay alert. Night returned, this time filled with sounds of movement reported by the LPs. Skipper didn't seem concerned. For sure, the VC knew uninvited guests occupied their neighborhood. The third day, at 1000 hours, the battalion staff chopped in with resupply, got a sit rep from the CO, and filled their bird with fresh corn for the colonel's evening mess. The S3, fearing the VC marked the chopper's position, ordered the captain to shut it down and relocate across the cornfield. The staffers boarded and flew to safety and hot chow. Word came to break down camp and saddle up, time to move out. With fighting holes filled and flank security called in, India casually formed up. Grunts milled around the large open area, separating Mihyep from thick hedgerows, checking packs for unnecessary weight, bartering sea rats, and bitching about humping in the noon heat to set up a new perimeter. Helmets and flak jackets laid on the ground. Hedgerows erupted in a cacophonic terror. Tom hit the ground, pawing for protection from his just-covered fighting hole. A hurricane of sound and fury howled through the kill zone. A VC battalion moved into heavily fortified emplacements at the tree line behind the hedgerows to ignite an ambush. A cauldron of destruction. The next 20 minutes lasted 5 seconds. Under continuous gunfire, Marines lay unprotected in the kill zone. Maximum firepower was urgently needed to get on these killers. Fear and inaction were not options. Tom jumped up, zigzagging madly through the tempest. He flopped next to the two-man 81mm observer team, 81s, less powerful than the 105 howitzers, but light and nimble and able to get out rounds fast, were first up. Bullets pounded the ground. The two Marines froze with eyes wide as saucers. Tom grabbed their handset to shout target coordinates to the battery with no time to adjust. He had to execute with precision. There were no second chances. Tom then grabbed the handset from his own radio operator to call fire missions to the company's artillery battery. Smoke rose behind the hedgerows. The 81s came out fast and landed exactly on target. Get some! The CO formed a counterattack, leading Marines straight at the hedgerows with breathtaking bravery. Brothers started to fall, seeping blood. The hailstorm pelted their unprotected position. Sniper rounds struck around Tom and the FO team. Young village women got caught in the crossfire. Tom tried to drag them to safety, but the VC bullets cut them down. The 105s bullied their way into the brawl. Huge explosions tore open the VC emplacements, showering metal, tree limbs, and debris into the sky. Tom, coordinating this onslaught of mortar and artillery rounds filling the sky, called mission after mission. The VC finally surrendered to the continuous artillery barrage, retreating to their mountain caves. The only gunshots were Marine rifles. Captain yelled, "Cease fire!" and called for medevacs. Tom rushed into the field to comfort the wounded and help the corpsmen gather the warriors for extraction. Cleanup finished. Battalion air lifted. A Husky, a tracked vehicle mounted with a .50 caliber machine gun, provided more firepower. Seemed everybody got the message. For sure, the VC did. The captain signaled to move out and pointed to Tom. "Good job, Lieutenant. Proud of you." Confidence soared. He had stared into the eye of the gorilla and not blinked. Initiation successful. The Sacred Brotherhood offered acceptance. So, it happens like this. Tom humped the cornfield and through thick jungle into a cemetery filled with tall dirt mounds, elevated vaults to protect the dead from monsoons. In this sanctuary for the dead, the skipper decided to spend the night. The command center set up next to the Husky. Exhausted by today's action, a perimeter quickly formed, deep holes were dug, and sleep shifts were organized. Tom registered HNI targets on likely avenues of approach and slipped into his hole for rest. Around 0100 hours, an RPG hit the Husky, exploding into a rainstorm of shrapnel in the darkness. A hunk of ragged metal, motivated by decades of conflict and hate, blew open Tom's gut, releasing blood and intestine in a torrent of gore. Other chunks tore holes in his arms, legs, and sliced open his head and ear. Drifting into a long corridor of brilliant light while feeling a wonderment of calm and peace, Tom's eyes suddenly opened. Screams, yells, and gunfire filled the night. Hell was in session. Seemingly from a long distance, the captain screamed, "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" With order temporarily restored, the skipper asked, "Everyone all right?" Feeling a slimy wetness, Tom calmly said, "I think I'm hit." Gunny shined a light. "My God, Lieutenant! Corpsman up! Get a medevac!" After several agonizing minutes, "Captain, Marble Mountain's ordered a stand down of all birds for the night." CO grabbed the handset and screamed, "I've got a lieutenant that needs a chopper right now, losing a lot of blood." "Sir." "Yes, sir." "Understood." "Will do." "Roger." Out. "Mission too dangerous and too far. Colonel says not till dawn." "Doc, how long does he have?" "They're bad wounds, and he's losing a lot of blood. Maybe 2 hours." "Fuck. Do what you can." Unimaginable hurt swept over the wounds. Tom struggled for comprehension through the unrelenting pain. "Doc! Morphine!" "Wounds in the abdomen and head can't do it." Helpless, self-reliance abandoned, groaning in pain and begging to be saved, screams rose from a hopeless soul pleading for life. "Captain, there's an Army warrant officer on our frequency. He says he's 2 clicks out. He heard our medevac call, saw the explosions and tracers. He wants to come down to extract." Most of us live on a continuum of expectations for physical and mental outcomes. Coincidence intervenes, but ultimately, things are reasoned and accounted for. Spiritual wonderments occasionally occur, but are explained in our context of experience and intellectual relativity. What causes an Army warrant officer at 0130 hours to fly solo in a Chinook into a Marine TAOR? Certainly the Army didn't authorize a night joyride in Indian country. Why get involved? Common sense requires self-preservation, Marines in the shit and a hot zone. Surely this pilot had family and loved ones desperately needing him. No need for glory, just a cadre of scraggly Marines to appreciate any act of courage. "Get me the biggest piece of open land you can find and pop some flares to mark. I'm coming down." Captain screamed, "Pop some flares! Mark the space between those 2 mounds." The vessel of mercy slowly drifted down into the madness. From the back of the perimeter, a firefight erupted, the VC firing at the unprotected hovering Angel. An RPG sailed over the propellers, challenging, "Go home, seek protection." The Angel refused and circled the death trap. "Pop some flares closer to the perimeter and lay down some fire. I'll get in. Prepare him," Captain whispered. "It's suicide." More shots missed their target. The miracle continued, comprehended only through appreciating the source. A brave soul, not seeking glory, labored to save a fellow traveler, his courage and mercy changing Tom forever. What do you say to a man risking everything to save your life? Don't underestimate the grace of your fellow man. It will amaze and bring love to your heart. The Kong punched through the perimeter, creating mayhem and chaos. The Angel landed in the midst of a Kong Marine slugfest. Bullets ripped at the hull as the Angel patiently waited while Marines placed Tom on a poncho to deliver him to his salvation. The vessel, with agonizing slowness, clawed its way through darkness, seeking light. The Marine screamed, "Go! Go! Go!" No one shot at this vulnerable and fragile silhouette. Finally, the ship and the two strangers reached calm waters and set sail to safe havens. This guardian angel had rescued Tom, revealing the veil of salvation. Suffering and abandonment of earthly things brought a transformation. He had been saved, and he surrendered to the promise of the cross. The need to talk shit in the officers' club vanished. Home, just-born daughter, and a new life beckoned.
That was Guardian Angel, read by Ken Moretti, written by Robert Waldruff. I'm joined by Joe Maslanka, David Aldridge. I've asked these two gentlemen to join me in the studio to talk about Robert Waldruff because they knew him well as a classmate, as a former and fellow Marine, and as a warrior. Robert passed away recently, and I've been looking forward to this day, gentlemen, when we could hear Robert's signature piece, Guardian Angel. Joe, I want to start with you. You shared a lot in common with Robert, different generation of Marine, but I've been given the impression over the years there really only is one Marine, separated by a couple centuries. We both men of deep abiding faith. That story was the day that Robert began to hear the voice of God for the rest of his life. That story was the day that Robert believed he had been the focus of a miracle. He wasn't shy about saying that. No, he was those two things that both of you gentlemen are. Both men of deep abiding faith, but both warriors. And I wanted to have you talk to us about Robert in that vein. He was a warrior. Man was trained to take lives, yet such a deep abiding faith in a forgiving and participatory God. Yeah. And I know you both feel the same. So talk to us about Robert Waldruff.
We knew we were in the Marine Corps together, so he would give me the old Semper Fi and how you doing. But I think we really latched on when he found out I was becoming a pastor, and he just thought that was great. And we didn't hang out, we didn't at each other's houses or anything. But all of a sudden, I'd go upside. I usually get up early in the morning, and I'm doing study for clergy and all that. And here would be a email from Robert, and it would be a poem, and they were bathed in faith, bathed in Christ. I brought one along with me. I don't know if I have time to read anything, but you can tell he was coming to grips with the pandemic and looking at it and I can relate to how he must have felt watching everything that was going on in this country, knowing what he sacrificed for this country. And just Robert as a writer, of course, I read Guardian Angel and we just listened to it. And I read a story he wrote called Semper Fi about how he has to go home. And I was thinking as I'm reading these two stories, this guy went home, buried his friend. And it was probably just a short time later, he goes through this thing at Guardian Angel. When you meet him, you never know that this was a man that went through those things. And
when you met him, you didn't know he was a Marine, though.
I did know he was a Marine. Absolutely.
Yeah.
He let you know that.
Robert didn't walk this dog, but he took the Marine out for a walk a lot.
But the things he had been through, like, it just unraveled slowly as I knew him. Like I knew he was a captain in the Marine Corps, and I knew he had been in Vietnam, but I didn't know the degree of what he had gone through. And he didn't really talk much about it. He wanted to know more about. He would send me the poem and see if I was picking up on the subtle messages of faith and the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
It was a special relationship. He was a great guy.
David, he was a gruff guy.
Oh yeah.
He had a bad temper. I know.
He was intense. And the funny thing is, I think we were in the same class that was his first Mighty Pen class. He sat on my left side, And thereafter, every class we took, which was, it was 10, 12 classes, he sat right there on my left side. I got to know him over the years very well. And he used to send me his poems also and ask me, what do you think? And I realized over a period of time that salvation, redemption, angels were a common theme in all of his poetry. He always gave credit to God. He and I both knew it was a miracle he survived that wound.
Reading his stories yesterday, he uses a pseudonym
Yeah.
in Guardian Angel, but he doesn't in his other stories. He doesn't in Semper Fi. He talks about himself and his wife.
Calls himself Tom.
Mm-hmm.
He uses Tom, yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like he's trying to keep a distance from that.
When you're severely wounded like that, the ramifications of that, because his entire life, he was missing huge amounts of his intestines. They had to do surgical workarounds, and he had to deal with that his entire life.
And when it came time to tell that story, he probably could only get but so close to it. And he had to interpose this character, Tom, to be able to talk about it candidly.
Yeah.
I've seen that. I mean, a lot of you guys will do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems the more common, the more dire and grave the stories are.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'll see the interposition of a fictional character to live your lives for you so you can talk about it. And it must be very healing.
It's easier to use Mishevsky than it is to be writing my name the whole time. It just feels, I don't know. It's easier to write, but I think he had deeper reasons.
Yeah. And I loved his poems. He
Saxophone.
was always about his connection to the divine. He was that way right up to the day he passed. His faith was the kind of faith that was born of combat.
No atheists and foxholes.
No, not a whit.
Let's talk about that miracle, okay? So he's in a cemetery. There are large cemetery mounds, not a lot of places for something the size of a Chinook, which was basically 3 houses with a propeller to land. It's midnight. All the Marine helicopters have been grounded. Robert's terrifically wounded, given about 2 hours before he bleeds out. His commander's on the horn, and he's told, no choppers, make him comfortable. Then an Army helicopter, an Army pilot, is monitoring a Marine frequency, which Joe doesn't have. An Army pilot says he's alone in a Chinook, I'll come get him, pop some flares. Robert never knew the man. Robert had passed out, lost consciousness on the battlefield, awoke in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And he was told this story. He didn't even know this. He wasn't conscious when this happened. And I loved every time he told this story. He cursed the fact that an Army guy saved him. He hated that, right? He was very aware that this was his guardian angel. He's like, damn it, he was with the Army. And I mean, Joe, this, what do they do to you, man? You Marines.
I don't know. We used to go to Rock City to pick fights with the Army from Fort Eustis. So I don't know what it is. But then you meet a guy like Dave and you start to realize that it's all out there to save the country. And I don't see it today as much as I saw it then with some of the younger crew. I don't see that animosity.
But you still see the Semper Fi. You still see a Marine as a Marine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Interestingly enough, the Marines that come through the class, and we all get to know each other pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we know things, we hear stories that spouses don't hear. I remember, do you remember the memorial we had here for Robert?
Mm-hmm.
And his wife said, I think all 3 of us, that she had heard us say things about Robert that night she didn't even know. Married to him 50
Mm-hmm.
years.
Yeah, he told me once, he said, I can't talk about this with my wife. He says, she's just a delicate soul and very fragile. And so he never talked with her about his being wounded, about his service. the things that we talked about every week in our classes.
Mm-hmm.
And we just loved being together with him.
This story, which is read in a really breathless, moment by moment, tick, tick, tick fashion. David, you experienced enough combat. That felt like it was happening.
Actually took me back to the day I remember discussing this in the class. He was on the verge of tears because it was extremely important in his life that he get this story down right. And the feedback he got from all the other class members and myself and Joe seemed to, I don't know, it seemed to...
Antagonize is the word you're looking for.
Well, he was very pleased that we supported him all the way through that. Because, of course, in the class, there's a process where we talk about what we liked, maybe what we didn't like, but he was very pleased that he got feedback from people who cared about him.
You see, but the first time I met Robert, you guys remember, I antagonized him. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but I was working not with the true life episode, but with the telling of the story. And the first versions of that story were like all of the pieces that come our way. You're not professional writers by and large, had some things that could stand improving. Well, Robert wasn't going to have this story improved. This is what happened, man. And you remember, so he's like, you want me to come in this classroom and bleed myself white, talk to them about my fellow Marines, and you want to edit it? And I'm like, yeah. Well, wait. So he didn't come the next class. He quit, right? And then I emailed him and I said, "Hey, man, I'm sorry you felt the need to separate from us, but we're always here for you. If you want to come back, we're always here. And if you write something that you'd like me to read again, I'd be more than happy to." Remember, he comes back the third week. There he is in his seat. I see him. I say, "Robert, I'm glad to see you. Would you like to have a private word with me in the hall?" Because I figured, well, if there's some medicine for me to take, I should take it. And Robert says, "All right." I said, "Where you been?" He goes, "I was in timeout." I said, "Well, what brought you back?" He said, I thought it through, and I thought that you're only here trying to help us tell these important stories with the best skill set we can have. You guys have both done that, right? And over the years, and it's a process. And Robert had just started that process. And I said, "Well, I'm so glad to see you back." And he says, "But that doesn't mean that you should take a raft of shit off of me." And I said, I'm so proud of what I said. I said, "Robert, if taking a raft of shit off of you is what it takes for you to sit in that seat and be in that classroom, then back up the truck." And I think at that moment, Robert, I wasn't a Marine, but I think insofar as Robert could embrace somebody who was not a Marine, that's when he and I became close.
Thinking about it, most of the shit you took in the classes came from Marines.
Oh,
The Colonel.
Yeah,
Kathleen and Robert.
Yeah.
Always giving you shit.
and well, you are wearing a USMC veteran shirt right now, Joe.
I was a nicer guy. I came in through the 80s. I was kinder, gentler Marine.
Well, I remember when you guys stepped out of the room to talk, and I was thinking,
only one of them is coming back.
Should I go out there and sort of referee this, keep them arm's length away from each other? And then I thought, I'm too old for that shit.
Yeah.
No, I'm not getting between Robert and somebody else.
Well, see, once Robert loved you,
Oh, yeah.
he loved you.
Oh, that was it.
I mean, it was, he loved you like a Marine.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for coming by. We'll always miss Robert. We'll miss all the Mighty Penners who have.
We'll always love him. He's just a wonderful human being.
Yeah. And we've lost a few. We'll lose more, but everybody's leaving behind these stories. Yeah. And these matter.
God bless him. God bless him. And his wife, Ann. God bless her.
I'm a better man to have known him. Great guy.
Semper Fi to you, Joe.
Semper Fi.
David, thank you for coming along, buddy.
Always on point.
Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families, offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America, and you want to learn how to best write and tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's pieces and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. And if you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Original music for this episode provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor